Welcome to the Pink Square Show. It's time to grab your crown, swish your gown, and get the party started. Welcome to the Pink Square Show, and thank you so much for joining the party. My name is Madeleine, and I am your host. Before I introduce you to our guest, I want to let you know that our feature word for this episode is multifaceted. Look it up, and I want you to use it to compliment or to describe someone. And feel free to send us video of you doing so for a chance to be featured on our show and to be possibly crowned the Pink Square Wordsmith of the Week. Now to our lovely guest. I would love to introduce you all to someone who definitely deserves the title of being a multifaceted individual. Miss Malika Dudley, who is, oh my gosh, where do we begin? Award-winning journalist and meteorologist for KITV. She is an actress, she is a singer, she is a mom, she is all things, all women, and most recently, she is the founder of a wonderful podcast that I'm so excited about called Communication. And she's going to tell us all about it. Malika, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as I mentioned at the top, you have this amazing podcast. But before we get into the podcast, tell our viewers a little bit about you. I know I kind of went on this long string of things that you do, but I'd love the viewers to hear from you, kind of who you are, what you do, how you got started in this business.
All right. Well, I'm a local Hawai'i girl. I grew up on the Big Island. It's the biggest island in the Hawaiian island chain, and that's why it took on the nickname of the Big Island. I grew up on the east side of the island in a very small town called Papa'iko. And so I went to public school from kindergarten all the way through high school. I graduated as valedictorian of my class. I was one of I think 7 of us, because if you got a 4.0 or higher, you're a valedictorian because of AP classes, of course. And then I went to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Since then, I did 3 years. It was a distance learning program in the broadcast meteorology program at Mississippi State. And then I eventually, after 16 years, I started my master's degree 17 years ago, actually. And I went back to school 2 years ago, and I just finished my master's degree at the age of 39 and got my master's degree last month in communication, or it's called communicology, but people don't really, it's a funny sounding word. It's the scientific study of communication. So just like biology, right? Communicology. And let's see, in those 16 years, a lot happened. Let's see, I got married, I had 2 kids, I became a meteorologist, I worked in television news, I worked in digital news, and then I went back to television news. So my life has kind of been all over the place from the very beginning. And the way I got into the industry was actually a little bit of luck, and I think just having a good work ethic. I met the right people at the right time at a nightclub. And just randomly, the meteorologist or the weather person for that news station had just spoken to my father for some reason. And he had told him, Malika wants to be on TV. And mind you, this was on a long list of random stuff. I said, maybe I want to fix cars. Maybe I want to be a chef. Maybe I want to be on TV. And he introduced me to the news director at this nightclub, who later I found out didn't even remember meeting me, but he gave me his card. And so at the time I was a French teacher. I was teaching elementary school French at Le Jardin Academy over in Kailua on the island of Oahu. And I knew nothing about news. So I wrote to this news director and we started an exchange, and I knew nothing. He said, okay, why don't you come in and write a 30-second VO based off of this AP, blah, blah, blah. And I write back, what is the AP? What does a VO stand for? About how long is 30 seconds? Can you give me an example?
I love it.
And he was so kind. He wrote back. He answered all of my questions. I remember coming into the studio and Keahi Tucker was sitting there, who is a very dear friend of mine now, but at the time, I was starstruck.
Sure.
And they had me sit next to him and read these god-awful VOs that I had, which stands for voiceover, which I had written. And it really was terrible. It was terrible. But then they had breaking news pop into the teleprompter, and it happened to be a tsunami. And my father is a tsunami expert. And so I grew up knowing about tsunamis, what to do, what to look out for, et cetera, et cetera. So I was able to kind of turn on, if you will, during that time. Then they threw me on the weather wall and I knew nothing. I looked at the wall and I literally said under my breath to the meteorologist that was sitting beneath the camera that nobody else could see, but I could see. And I said, what's that? And he would say, satellite. Clouds are on the satellite. It really was terrible. But then surf came on, and I'm a surfer. And so I just kind of went with the flow about the surf report. And for some reason, those two instances, and that coupled with my resume, which showed that I'm a hard worker, I suppose that's what they kept saying. They said, we have this box full of overqualified people, and for some reason we keep coming back to you. I don't know if that was a compliment or not, but one thing led to another. And after 4 or 5 interviews, they offered me the job, and that's how I got started in news.
That is so inspirational. It is so inspirational, especially for people who are trying to get into any industry, for entrepreneurs, for novices. And my takeaway from that is, you never know who you're going to meet, but work ethic is also super important. I love that you weren't intimidated by the process and you went for it.
It was intimidating.
Well, but it didn't stop you though. It didn't stop you
Yes.
from going back. And even when you recognized that, this is not so great, you still kept going and were willing to kind of roll with the punches. So it didn't work out at the news desk, but then you went over to meteorology and you learned as you went along. I love that story. It's really, really motivational and inspirational.
One of my favorite quotes is, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. That's by Dr. Susan David.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's what it describes.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Something, and I'm sure because of your humility, you're very humble. You have not mentioned the fact that you are former Miss Hawaii. And I find that, and you're also a black belt in karate. So when you look at that, or at just those two, again, this is why the adjective multifaceted has been applied to you, because you have this beauty queen who can probably kick butt whenever she wants to. And, it's not the norm to find someone who has that kind of talent on both spectrums. You're also, I also want to talk about that further with regard to your interest in science. Again, occupying a space that's typically male dominated. So, how is a beauty queen successful in male dominated spaces? How have you been able to do that?
Well, first of all, at the Miss America pageant, I met so many multifaceted women. And I love that the Miss America system is the largest provider of scholarships for women in the world. And each of those women is just still so dear to me and inspires me every day. I love that that's what's celebrated there, is that you can have all these different sides of you. And I call myself a jack of all trades, master of none. But, that is a female thing, right? A pageant. And so we didn't have to, within the pageant world, really deal with too much of that. It was the outside world judging from the outside towards us. And so when I first got the job at KGMB 9 News, that's where I started out in news, was at KGMB 9. I heard later from my now best friend that the word going around the newsroom was, oh, they had just hired their token Miss Hawai'i. And so it's always been difficult fighting against the stereotype, but I've never really, I didn't know I was taking on this stereotype. I didn't know that these things were being said about me at the time. You know, it's all hindsight. But I feel like if you just put your head down and you do your personal best, that's all you can do. And it doesn't matter what gender you are, or what your background is. It's all about just that, you know, inside that you do and you feel that you're doing the best that you can do in that moment. And the best you can do in any moment can be different, which I think I've just recently kind of discovered, that it's okay to have bad days, and your best on a bad day is going to look very different from your best on, you know, a day where you're very focused and driven and on it. And especially as a mother now, you know, giving ourselves grace for those moments when, you know, we aren't at our personal best, at least to our own expectations, because that's how life is.
Yes.
With science, I've always been surrounded by men, and I honestly haven't really noticed it too much. Again, I think I just put my head down and do what I can do. I know that, for example, when Hurricane Lane came, what is that, 3 years ago, 4 years, 2 years? I don't know, COVID. How many years? Who knows? But we had this giant hurricane that came towards the islands. It was called Lane several years ago. And I was on my way to France. And so I started doing updates on social media. And at the time, no one was really using social media to give updates, but I wasn't on TV. I was in the digital space.
Okay.
And I did kind of judge myself during that time as not being as important as someone who is on television or who has a larger platform. And what I discovered through that process, which I didn't give updates in order to, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I was just giving updates because I was trying to inform my family and friends. And within 5 days, I gained 10,000 followers.
Wow.
And people were saying that, you know, they needed a source for credible, non-sensational information, and that they were so happy that they had found me. And it just gave me this extra dose of confidence during that time that, you know, even if I don't have the platform that I hope to have, or I'm not where I really would like to be when it comes to my career, I can still make a difference, even if it's on a smaller scale. Because if you make the difference in even just one life, then it's all worth it, right? My dad would always say that. Well, if I just save one life, it's all worth it. And so it was really interesting to go through that with Lane and to see that it's needed. In fact, there is a hurricane in the East Pacific right now, and I'm doing updates, and I don't know, it just feels good, whether I'm a woman or a man, or, you know, doesn't matter. People will find the people that they trust, the people that they feel are credible. And so just do your best.
What a strong message, and a great message. And, you know, I love the fact that you are somewhat unbothered about these gender spaces, and that your mindset is, I'm just going to move forward and do my best. And I think that that's a very important message to all, but I think particularly women, because we do tend to get stuck in our own spaces, or we feel that, well, no, I can't explore that over there because I don't see anyone that looks like me. I don't see another woman there, or you automatically have your own preconceived notions about what's going to happen should you try. So I really, really like that message that you've given. I want to switch gears a little bit. First of all, I don't think I congratulated you for your completion of your master's degree. I think that's a huge accomplishment, and definitely a strong message to all that it doesn't matter what age you are, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. Your education is important, and you can do anything at any time that you want to. So congratulations to you for that. You mentioned French. You've mentioned it twice now. What is your connection to French?
Yes. Well, my mother is from North Africa.
Yes.
So she is an Algerian slash French citizen. And Algeria used to be a territory of France before the Battle of Algiers, and they gained their independence. And my mother actually chose French citizenship over Algerian citizenship at the time. I carry 3 passports. I have an Algerian, a French, and a US passport. So technically, I guess I'm a triple citizen of the world. So that's the connection to France. My mother has a very big love. There's a lot of Algerians and Arab ethnicities in France for that reason. And she considers France to be her culture. And so that's what we've been most exposed to. Although I've been to Algeria, and that was definitely a learning process to just see where my mother came from. So it gave me definitely a deeper understanding of who she was, because when you're talking about women and women and men and gender differences and having to fight against those types of that type of discrimination. My mother had that very much. She wore pants and rode a bike and did the things that women weren't allowed to do. And so she was harassed in many different ways and threatened. And, she was a straight A student. And so because she was a straight A student in school, it had to be because she was doing something, cheating or doing something else to get her good grades. It wasn't because she was smart. And so she had to definitely be a very strong woman to fight against that in Algeria. And actually now it makes me think of one thing that I did have to go through. And you talked about me being a black belt. Well, at my dojo, they really didn't put a lot of emphasis on going in the ranks. It took a long time to get to the next belt, to the next belt, to the next belt. These days, they're like pumping them out, but it would take years to get from one belt to the next. I started at the age of 5, and it was at the age of 16 that I got my junior black belt.
Wow. And
I refused to be tested for my official black belt because I just didn't feel like I was ready. And so my sensei, who wasn't a male, but he tested me in secret. Like while I was in class, he would make me do all the things to make me pass this test. And so one day I magically am given this black belt, and I didn't receive my certificate for another 3 years.
Wow.
And I never even thought about it. And when I received it, my female sensei wrote to me to tell me that the reason my certificate had not been put through for 3 years is because she had to fight for me because they did not like advancing women within this Japanese karate association. And so it took 3 years for them to finally issue that certificate and get it in the mail, which then, of course, after I heard the story behind it, made it mean so much more.
Yeah, and it was beautiful that behind the scenes there was a woman supporting another woman. Cheers to your female sensei. So I asked you about your connection to French because of the communication aspect. Do you think that being multilingual had anything to do with your interest in communication, and did it impact you in your decision to do this podcast? I mean, I know in what you've mentioned, some of it came from your thesis, but how has being multilingual impacted you as far as communication is concerned?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever asked myself that. I'm sure that to a certain extent, that is definitely in the back of my mind always. Part of my path has always been that I've always been multilingual, or whatever, duolingual. I only know two languages. Most people in the world know more than 2 languages. But
Not
in the
me.
US, in the US, it's very unusual to find someone that knows more than English.
Yes.
And so I've always felt very, no, I take that back. I've not always felt very thankful. I have to be honest. When I was younger, I rebelled against it. It was so hard, so difficult to only speak French to my mother when I couldn't find the words. And I mean, it makes me emotional right now thinking about it. I remember, I couldn't say blueberry, and I really wanted to eat some blueberries. My mom was like, until you remember it, you're not getting blueberries. And I sat on the stairs and cried. It's funny that that's the memory that sticks out for me. But it was also very difficult to communicate with my mother and have that mother-daughter bond.
Yes.
And she made that sacrifice in order for us to be multilingual. And so I see that now, but it was difficult growing up knowing or not being able to communicate to my fullest extent with my mother, who I love so much. And on a related note, I have 2 children now, and it's been really difficult for me in deciding how to pass on my multilingual nature to them, because I know what I went through. And so it's been really difficult. My mother always would say, well, if your children don't speak French, I won't speak to them. I'm like, that's not the right way to motivate me.
Typical mom. Typical mom.
Yeah, so I try my best with them, but they're far from being bilingual. Me being bilingual, I know, from science that it's definitely opened up a bunch of those neural pathways.
Yes.
And so in that type of way, for sure, I think that it has impacted the who I am and the way that I am in the world, and also the exposure to a different culture.
Yeah.
I think is probably the most important part of it, because it opens me up to knowing that there are people that are different out there and have different values and grew up differently. And it just makes you more tolerant and more able to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, to love.
Yes. Yes.
To love people in the world,
Yes.
because you can understand that we can come from different places, but we're still all this, we're all the human race. So in that way, for sure. I don't know if directly, it definitely wasn't like, oh, because I'm bilingual, I'm doing this podcast. It was more so just a general sense of, like you were saying at the beginning of the podcast, that this is just so needed, that it's clear that people need help in the communication area.
Yes.
I know I need help. So I was really excited. Yeah, I was really excited to be able to basically continue my education by creating this podcast as my thesis project. So at first I wanted to do a documentary, then COVID hit. And so it was a total shift to a different idea that I had. And we fleshed out that idea. And so this is what came to be was, let's learn together from an expert. It also gives communication experts, communication scholars, a platform where they only have to give me 30 minutes. And now hopefully some of their research will get out into the right hands, into the hands of people that really are looking for that type of information to improve, or the beautification of communication, which is where communication comes from. It's a slang term that refers to that, or the unification of community, which both of them, those are both of my goals with this podcast.
Beautiful. An excellent segue, because I'm trying to kind of piece it all together to get to this point, because the reason I asked you about language is one thing that I've learned being in that language space or language education is I've really learned how language connects you to others and really opens you up to the rest of the world. I did not know how important it was to those connections and communication as a whole. So when I saw that, oh, okay, she speaks French, I wonder if this had anything to do with it, or maybe she doesn't even know how much it's actually opened, that pathway for her. And this is another reason why I was just so enthralled by your podcast and what you're doing. So let's get into it. So the title of your podcast, Communification, where did you come up with that?
So that was the beautification of
Yes.
communication or the unification of community. So I actually created a whole list of different titles. And that one just kind of stood out to me. I loved that it was different.
It's catchy.
So, I mean, it's probably not the best thing to have kind of a made up word as your podcast title as far as like Google search engines and whatever, but it was the word that spoke to me. And I like that I have to explain it. I like that it's not, oh yeah, it's a communication podcast because it's called Communication Podcast. I like that it's communication. Wait, what does that mean?
Yes. And it got me. That's exactly. So yes, it got me because I was like, what is this communication? I'm really interested in this. And then I started reading through and my mind was exploding because again, I don't think there's anything else like this out there, this type of topic. Okay, so what are some of the subjects that you're hoping to cover, and what is the premise of the podcast?
The premise of the podcast is to gain access, have the general public gain access to expert information. So I want people to be able to have a source for credible scientific information.
Okay.
I am the messenger. So it's nice that I have one foot in that communication realm as a communication scholar, having gotten my master's degree in that, but also I have one foot in media. So I know how to produce these types of things. I know how to interview people. I know how to, do the back end of, this media side of it. So it's nice for me that I have a foot in both worlds. So the first part of the podcast is all about learning. Okay. So I interviewed Dr. Spotswood about social media. The first season is communication and technology. So the first episode, the premiere episode, is about social media and how it's impacting us. And so we talk about the positivity bias, which is that people tend to present their best selves online. And what is that doing to us? What does the research say it is doing to us? And we talked about a lot of stuff, authenticity. We talked about comparisons, and there's so much research out there. She has a model which she developed, which is called the hyper perception model. And that's how when we go online and we observe two people interacting, so they're commenting or writing to each other, and we read this as an outside person, that we make hyper perception. So we look at that and we start to go, oh, that relationship might be more intense than it actually is in real life. So if you can imagine that in a romantic relationship, maybe you're interested in a boy and he and this other girl you don't know are communicating. And so you go, oh my gosh, like, is he with her? You start making all these hyper perceptions about it. When if you actually ask the two people, they might say that, no, actually, we're just friends, or, that's my cousin.
Right.
So we make hyper perceptions because we don't know very much about the actual interaction. So that was really interesting in my first podcast episode. The second part of the podcast is I like to break it down with a real person. Not that researchers aren't real people, but, let's keep them in their category. Tell us what you know. I know you don't have a lot of time. And then I send this research interview. So I sent the Dr. Spotswood interview to my guest, who was Jessica G from the Bucket List family. She listened to it. And then she and I had a conversation. And so we broke it down from her perspective as a influencer who has millions of followers. Right. How does she feel about all this research that's come out about social media and the positivity bias and authenticity labor and all of these things that came up in the first podcast? And so it's been a delightful process for me, because not only am I learning, but then I got to have these deep, thoughtful discussions with guests. And you're right, a lot of podcasts center on, someone's story, and those are wonderful. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. And so I guarantee you there isn't a podcast out there where Jessica G is just talking about where it's centered around a concept and research. And so that is what's so exciting to me, is that as my guests come on, they're discussing the topic at hand, I'm not asking them biographical questions. We are literally, for example, deception is one that's coming up. I have one about back burner relationships coming up. I have a cyberbullying one coming up. Body image in social media. So that one is already recorded. And Anuhea Jenkins, who is a Nahoku Hanohano Award winner. She's a very popular musician here in Hawaii and across the US for her like reggae type music. And so she's going to join me next week. And from Dr. Farduli's interview about body image and social media, she and I are going to dissect that and talk about the research that is out there right now and how does it actually impact us? How does it impact her? How have our body image issues changed? Because we're the generation that didn't have social media and now we do.
Yeah.
How do we feel that younger people, do we know any younger people who have only had social media and have not known a different world? So yeah, anyway, you can see I'm passionate.
I love it. I love the passion. I love the subjects. I'm sitting here thinking, oh, for goodness sake, am I going to be glued to my to this podcast?
Please.
Am I going to have time to do anything else? Like, these are topics. These are topics. These are serious topics and well thought out topics and subjects that I'm telling you right now we need, and we are not getting enough of this information, particularly the people, the age group that actually frequent social media. This information is so timely, and I don't even know if you understand like what you're doing for members of the public. And I really, 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 I'm imploring you, viewers, to please watch this podcast and really, really get into these subjects, because I think that there's so many things that we as a society are going through right now because of the very things that you are going to talk about. And you're almost providing a blueprint, if you will, for how to tackle some of the some of the misgivings, some of the negativity that comes from a lot of the things that you've just mentioned. So I really, really hope that people tune into this. How frequently are the episodes going to be airing?
So I'm planning to launch in August of 2021.
Okay, great.
And because I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I am very detail oriented, and there is a place for that, but also I need to start just giving myself grace and letting go, as well, to just put it out there already. And so right now I'm in the process of editing and doing all of the marketing, and I'm basically a one-woman band. I do have someone that I hired, a local mommy here on Maui, who's helping with my website and some of my social media graphics and things. But a lot of it has really been just, driven from within, from the passion for wanting this information to get out there, because I do believe that it's going to help people. And so the plan right now, because the plan has changed, and what's so cool about this is that the plan has changed from the beginning until now because it was driven by research. And so at first I was going to have a guest come on first and we would discuss a topic. And then it would almost be like Dear Abby. And I would send that to a researcher, and then the researcher would pick it apart, or there would be a question for the researcher. And I realized through doing the research and reading up in this academic literature in this area of teaching via podcast or via a audio visual or audio element, that we should learn first. Let's learn first, and then we can reflect, and then you're more likely to process the information and be able to do something with that information. And also, researchers don't have a lot of time. So logistically, that worked better as well. And so along the way, just things have changed a little bit. So at first, my premiere episode is all of it at once. So you've got Dr. Spotswood, Transition, Jessica G, and it's about an hour long. And I decided that I wanted to split them in two. And so the way that and currently expecting to release the episodes, that the premiere episode will be just one package, but from then on, every week after, it will be split into two. So on a Tuesday, I'll release the researcher, and on the Wednesday, I'll release the guest interview that is based on the researcher. Just kind of break it up into more bite-sized pieces. I might also do something for the news. And so if I did create they call it a package. And so that's where you pull a soundbite from here and from there, and then you slap on some voiceover and package it up into a nice little 3-minute package or something like that, say. If I am going to be doing that for the news, which I'm pitching it right now, so cross your fingers for me.
Fingers and toes crossed. Done.
Thank you.
Done.
Then I might also have that audio element uploaded at some point as well, as kind of like a bonus or just a sneak peek, so that if people want to just get like a real quick glimpse into this topic, they can, but also then they can understand whether or not they're really interested in this topic, and they could listen to the longer format. So that is the idea for now. I'm thinking every other week we're going to launch with 5 to 8 episodes all at once, but then the social and everything will kind of be spaced out every 2 weeks. So that's the thought right now. Wish me luck. But you can follow on social. So on Instagram, I have a Communication Podcast Instagram. I have a Communication Podcast Facebook. I have a Twitter, and I have a TikTok. And so if you follow on either or all of those platforms, I will have the updates posted there. And I also have an email list. And so you can easily go to communicationpodcast.com, sign up for the email list, and you'll get the updates. And I don't send out a lot of updates because, girl, I don't have time. I can barely get one email out a month.
No, you don't have time, Miss Multifaceted. No, you don't. You really don't. I want to ask one last question, because I have seen you've been so wonderful and gracious in sharing your journey in the development of this podcast. And again, doing things that other people don't do. Typically, everybody wants to present you with the finished package. Nobody wants to talk about any challenges. Nobody wants to show you, because we hug our information like this, whether it's something positive that we get or a negative thing that we go through, we hug it like this, and we don't want anybody to see, the developmental stages. But you have been very, very open with the development of this podcast, and I love it. I've learned some stuff watching you pick out, your color schemes, putting together your media kit, your website, and I'm taking notes. I'm like, and she did. Oh, and I looked at yours, and I'm like, oh, she's got covers for her highlights. Oh my God, she's gone. Yeah, you are a perfectionist. You're very detail oriented, because I'm like, she's covered everything. But even how you talk about like what colors work, what don't, and why. And I'm like, oh, I thought it was perfect, but another note to self. What have been some of your biggest challenges in developing this amazing show of yours?
Gosh, the biggest challenge, I have a trailer that I've been working on. It's not a trailer. It started out as a trailer, and then it was 35 minutes long. And so I decided to make it episode 0. It's a making of the podcast. I think what I've learned from the process is definitely to just roll with the punches. And I'm the type of person, actually, when my son was 3, he was sent to an occupational therapist, an OT, because they said like, oh, he had these sensorial issues. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? And so the OT ends up giving us the diagnosis, if you will. And she explains to us that Jackson is the type of kid that if you tell him one thing, you have to stick to it, or it completely like throws him off. And the example she gave was, for example, if your husband you guys were driving to the grocery store, and he said that he was going to Foodland. And so you in your mind had like, okay, I'm hitting this aisle and then that aisle, and then that's what Foodland has in this section, blah, blah, blah. But then he pulls into Whole Foods, and he's thinking it's a grocery store.
Right.
And you're going,
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. I planned my whole life around Foodland. And that is me. And I realized from taking my son to the OT that I had given him this genetic, who knows if it's genetic, but I had given him this neurosis. And that is something that I've been learning to let go of, is being able to, I have things so mapped out in my mind, and I think I know how this is going to go. And as things progress, unfortunately, it's just not the case. It's not the way that life works. There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be something that happens, and you're just going to have to deal with it and move on from there. And you need to learn from those moments. And so I think that's maybe my biggest learning lesson through this process, but also one that I've been having in life in general. As far as the podcast goes.
Well, I am so excited for you. I am so grateful to you. You are surprisingly very down to earth for someone who has accomplished so much. I anticipated you in your head running around singing, "I'm every woman." I'm not a singer like you, but I just hey.
Maybe I looked like that a minute before I came on, because I just came off the news, and you emailed me, you're like, "Oh, can you confirm?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm confirming a minute before." I'm like, "Yes, I'm coming." I literally ran into the room next door. I am wearing a t-shirt and yoga pants under this. I threw this is like major mom bun. I don't know if you see that. And I was like, "Bye, give me a crown."
I love it.
It's crooked now, but that's
Grace under fire. I love it. I love it. My wish is much success to you. I cannot wait until this podcast airs. I know that I need to make sure that my notifications are set so that the moment that one comes out, I can definitely get on it. I am hoping and praying that this is not the last time that you and I will speak. I think that you are someone who is really, really, really important to such a time as this. And I hope that your podcast, in fact, I know that your podcast is going to touch a lot of people, and it's going to help a lot of people. And the reason I say I'm grateful is because you're doing something that's going to impact others, and it's not about yourself, it's about helping others. So thank you for lending your experience, your heart, and your care for community to all of us. Thank you so much, Malika. Absolutely adore you. Absolutely adore you. You have definitely gained a fan, so thank you.
I don't know if I feel very deserving of all those kind words, but thank you so much for this discussion and for giving me this platform to share about my podcast. I'm very excited about it, and I'm very grateful that there are people like you that are interested. And congratulations to you on your podcast, and best of luck to you as well.
Thank you.
And I also hope that it's not the last time I hear from you.
Thank you. Blessings to you. Mahalo for all that you do.
Thank you.
Guys, that was our show for today. Again, our wonderful guest was Malika Dudley. Please, again, I can't implore you enough. Watch that podcast, Communication. You will definitely benefit from it. Take care of yourselves for now. Until we meet again. Bye now. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Pink Square Show. See you next time.